The EU, I mean, it never fails to disappoint, does it? It like never ever fails to disappoint. It's amazing how the EU just, you look at this and you see that it's not working, because it's not working. And we see this, for instance, in how that complete and utter autocrat, that little dictator von der Leyen, last week just automatically, unilaterally decided to announce that the whole of the EU apparently stands with Israel. The whole of the EU stands with Israel, even though it clearly, observably, does not. Because let's be honest with this. We have seen how this is a matter, a question that is highly divisive. European citizens have different opinions on this. Some of them stand with Israel. Some of them stand with Gaza and the Palestinians. A lot of them simply do not stand with anybody. They remain neutral, and they think that it's really insane to get involved in somebody else's foreign war. You know? So this is a highly divisive matter, and it is insane that autocrat von der Leyen then thinks it is all right for her to speak on behalf of 450 million European citizens and say that the whole EU stands with Israel just like that, even though that is clearly not true. In the same way that she's right now with her clownish colleague Charles Michel, by the way, how they're right now in Washington talking with that complete idiot Biden. They're taking their orders from Washington as usual. When they are there speaking on behalf of all of Europe, 450 million European citizens. The problem, however, is of course that they haven't been elected to do this. They haven't been elected by anyone, because the EU is not a democracy. It's not a democracy. I mean, it's sad to say, but it's not a democracy. And I know that there are people in Europe who say, but the EU is a democracy, right? Because we've got the European Parliament, so it's a democracy. We have a parliament, ergo, therefore, it is a democracy. But the problem with that is that it's simply not true, because the European Parliament actually does not have any power, not any real power. No, it does not. It can't make any laws, for instance. It can only vote on things, and even then, the European Commission can simply sideline the European Parliament if it feels like it. I mean, ask the MEPs if they know, but also just look at the European Parliament itself and look at the Commission, decisions that they make, and it turns out that the EU is run by the Commission. They make the laws, they also implement the laws, they push down the laws, and the European Parliament basically doesn't really do anything and can't really do anything. Well, it's not entirely true. They can do a few things, but they're too disorganized to actually do anything about it. I mean, if they really cared about democracy, they really cared about freedom, if they really cared about people and they really cared about Europe itself and European society, then they might be able to make a fist and say, no, we don't want this, because one of the few things that the EEP can actually do is to say yes or no to the appointment of commissioners. It's one of the few things, but even there, the EP usually just votes them in. They can't even vote for them. They can't even say that these are the candidates we want. No, a candidate is provided to them, and then they either say yes or no. And usually they just say yes. So in principle, they might be able to make a kind of a fist right there on that issue. They might be able to stand up on the issue, but of course they can't, and they don't, because Europe is not really a democracy, because the Commission is not elected by anyone. They are the de facto rulers of Europe. They make the laws, they implement the laws, they push down the laws on everybody else. They are the junta that rules the EU, but they are not elected by anyone. So you cannot say that the EU is a democracy, because it is manifestly not so. So, the EU, it's such a disappointment, and I say this as someone who actually believes that European cooperation is important. I believe that some sort of European cooperation is important, because we don't want to go back to like the First World War, Second World War, and everything about the Cold War, everything about this, where you have people standing against each other, fighting each other, shit like that, poverty, hunger, war, that shit. We don't want this. So, which is why I think very practically that European cooperation is important. However, what I don't think is important is we have this entire gigantic bureaucracy then on top of the whole continent, which says that, oh, you have to do this, and we are going to tell you what to do, and we have to don't explain ourselves to anyone, because that's the reality right now. The European Commission, the EU, doesn't have to explain itself to anyone, because they basically just do what they like, and that's where it ends. Because the EU is not a democracy. The EU is a gigantic disappointment. So we need to do something about that. We see it's not working, we need to do something about it. The question then, however, is what are we going to do about this? Now, as far as I can see, there are only two options. That's basically more European integration or less European integration. Now, the more European integration would be basically turning the EU into a democratic state, a democratic federation. And there are some people who want this. Yes, there are some people who argue for this. And it's a valid opinion, I think. It's a valid opinion. We can have more European integration. We can have real European democracy. It's an option. The other option, however, is that we go back to a European economic community, where we have independent, sovereign nations, European nations who cooperate with one another, who create the wealth with one another, who create peace with one another, but who do not do so because they are mandated to do so by a unelected regime above them, but basically because it's the best thing for everyone. So in that system, we would have a European free trade zone. Basically, we would have a European economic community. We would also need some kind of European military cooperation, not unification, but cooperation, like a European NATO to replace NATO itself, which is run by the Americans, by and for the Americans. A European cooperation within a European community. This is something that we can choose to do so. This is something we can choose for. European cooperation within a European economic community. No European political bureaucracy, no European regime, no European laws that nobody understands, that make no sense whatsoever, and no European corruption, no billions of euros, even trillions of euros that are being spent on complete bullcrap by an EU that doesn't actually want or can tell what the hell they're spending it on. Because honestly, the EU spends so much money. They get billions upon billions of tax euros, and they spend billions upon billions on tax euros, even though the people who are spending this money, they haven't been elected by any citizen to begin with. So that is not honest. That is not democratic. It's just a disappointment. As usual, the EU is just such a disappointment. So we have to change this. This is what we have to do. We have to choose what we want. Do we want a European federation, or do we want a European economic community? It is a choice we have to make, but we actually have to make it. So this is something that I am arguing for. And it is something I want to see happen, that we take the EU and take it down and transform it into something that actually works, that is not bureaucratic, that is not undemocratic, that is not autocratic, that is not corrupt, but that's basically a form of cooperation, a voluntary cooperation between European states, something that works, something that actually adds value, something that actually creates peace and cooperation and well-being and wealth and cultural protection of our cultures and languages, and some sort of basically everything that's good, something that is not such a disappointment to me and to all Europeans. That is something we need to work for. And that is something I want to fight for.